Now, with that understanding, let's learn more about how this technology is playing an active role in this dynamic situation. Let's head over to Leah Cheshire. Leah?
Thanks so much, Gary. I'm joined now by Prasan Desai. He's NASA's Deputy Associate Administrator for the Space Technology Mission Directorate. Thank you so much for being here.
Grateful to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about the novel landing technology that is NDL. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so NDL stands for Navigation Doppler LiDAR. And one of the challenges for doing any space missions is knowing where you are and trying to figure it out, right? And so we're looking to develop newer capabilities that we can do that more precisely and that take up less volume and mass on the spacecraft, so that you can have all the available payload mass for instruments and other scientific things we're trying to do. And so this is the next generation of a new capability where we're trying to go from the traditional measurement using radar to a laser-based system. And so that's what this navigation Doppler LiDAR will be doing, is sending out 3 laser beams to try to get the velocity measurements in the lateral direction as well as the vertical direction.
So when it comes to NDL, what are some of the challenges we expect to see when using this technology?
So we've tested it on the ground in a number of platforms, from helicopters to landers here on the surface, on the Earth, to test this out. But this is the first time we're going to test it actually in the space environment on a lunar surface, right? And so we will see how that different environment will really affect the systems, right? And so one of the things that we would really like to know is what how the pulse comes back after they send a laser, and how it reflects back to the system, how long it takes to process, and how it will help define the solution to figure out the trajectory to go down to landing on the surface.
Now, this technology has become a little more critical for today's mission. So can you talk about how NDL is now being used in today's landing?
Right. So we put this as a tech demo with tech demonstration as a test. Right, we weren't planning to use it in line with the actual mission coming down to the landing, but now we are. So basically, it is now the primary system to help provide the velocity and altitude information so that the lander can land safely on the surface. And that's important because as the lander comes close down, we don't want it to tip over. And so we need to get an understanding of the vertical velocity so it knows how much thrust to slow down, but also the lateral velocity, because if it comes down sideways too much, it can tip over and fall. So by knowing the velocity, the lander can decide exactly how to come down and hover, basically slowly to come down. And that's why it's really important to do this testing. But here we are today. We're going to try it for the first time in line. And so we're very excited for the mission.
Yeah, a demonstration totally in action.
Yes.
So just very briefly, there are 2 other tech demos on this mission. Can you cover those very quickly?
Yeah, so 2 other things that we're trying to improve on is one, radio frequency mass gauge, which is to try to get a measurement of the fuel that's on any system, any spacecraft. One of the things about low gravity is the propellant doesn't settle down, where like in a car gas tank, it's on the bottom so you can measure it easy. In space, it floats. And so how can we do that so we know how much propellant there really is? And then the other one is scalps. One of the things that as it lands, the thrust is going to throw up all this eject of the lunar regolith thing. And so we have 4 stereo cameras that are going to take images of that and get data so that we can improve our modeling, so that in future landings we can make them more safer and things like that. So we're using that as a technology demonstration as well to improve future landings to make them more safer.
Well, thank you so much, Prasan. It's really been great speaking with you. Really exciting stuff. And for now, we're going to send it back to Gary and Josh.
Hey, thanks, Leah. Nova C is a little less than 55 kilometers from the lunar surface and about 20 minutes to powered descent initiation, a critical maneuver that marks the beginning of Nova C's final moments before touching down on the lunar surface. It's no secret that landing on the moon is challenging. Countries around the world have attempted this incredible feat, some successful and some not. Of course, the United States has landed on the moon many times, most notably during the Apollo program. But this may be the first landing by a U.S. commercial company enabled under NASA's CLPS initiative. Ahead of these important milestones, let's discuss the challenges of landing on the moon through CLPS. Take a look.
Landing on the moon is hard. We're going back. Under this Artemis program, we're going to be sending humans to the moon for the first time since Apollo. So ahead of humans, we want to get up as much science exploration and technology experiments as possible.
So CLIPS starts facilitating a lot of the early science, the things we want to learn before we can send humans. CLIPS stands for Commercial Lunar Payload Services, CLPS.
The services part is the key element. Ordinarily, when NASA delivers a payload to the surface of the moon, they do it with a commercial partner, but NASA controls the building of the vehicle. Now, we're buying the service of delivery of our lunar payloads to the surface of the moon.
It is a delivery service, akin to a delivery service that you have here on Earth.
NASA will provide payloads to a commercial company. They decide how to get it to the moon. They have to develop their own lander, but they also have to manage the entire end-to-end mission.
It's meant to provide affordable, rapid, frequent access to the lunar surface through American companies.
We're funding different companies.
We have commercial companies that are competing to win task orders to deliver our payloads to the surface of the moon.
One of the goals when we started CLIPS was to help establish a lunar economy.
Somebody has to do it first, and then it becomes commercially available. Then they're able to crank them up. Then they're able to make it more affordable. And so the lunar surface is just the next frontier for a commercial environment.
But we had to acknowledge up front, all the way through the highest levels of the agency leadership, that some of them will fail. These missions may not be as successful as a traditional NASA mission.
We have accepted the risk that going through this innovative approach with these commercial companies, that there could be some failures. Some of them are new companies. None of them have ever successfully landed on the surface of the moon. So they're going to learn lessons.
We need to give our vendors the opportunity to learn.
And so that'll help ultimately buy down our risk as these companies learn, okay, what does it take to actually build up the lunar lander, integrate payloads, get to the lunar surface and land safely?
They've been able to demonstrate that they have very, very good technical depth and the ability to design and execute missions. We're willing to take more shots on goal. And we aren't risking human lives. And in the big picture, if we're flying missions at 1/10 of the cost of a NASA mission and we fail 2 of them, we still get 8 missions for that same price.
Even with 1 or 2 or 3 failures, this is still a very economical proposition. It's a risk posture which is more risk tolerant than NASA is accustomed to. There's not a single one of these companies that's willing to bet their mission on a coin toss. Every one of them is doing what they can in order to have the most successful mission possible. But the important thing to realize is that risk tolerant does not mean risky. And the rewards are a long-term ability to get payloads to the moon inexpensively, frequently, and rapidly.
We want science, so we can then put more of our resources on even more science, exploration, and technology payloads and get more of a return on investment when we get to the moon.
CLIPS provides tremendous benefit across the scientific and economic communities.
So there's a lot we'd like to learn about the moon to help human habitation and prepare us for missions to Mars and beyond.
So the moon is the first step.
The teams here in Nova Control have been working diligently over the past 7 days to take us this far and are laser focused on the operations ahead. We're following the clock down to the start of those autonomous operations of Nova C, starting with the powered descent initiation. For now, we're heading back over to Leah Cheshire, who's standing by with NASA's Associate Administrator. Leah.
Thank you, Gary. I'm joined now by Jim Free, NASA's Associate Administrator. Thank you for joining us, Jim.
Thanks for having me.
This is a big day, and what are some of the challenges to landing on the moon that people might not expect?
Well, it is a big day, by the way. You're right. I think the challenges are multifaceted. First, getting into lunar orbit is a challenge. Going to the South Pole is different than going to other parts of the lunar surface. The lighting conditions are a lot different than at the equator. So you have your hazard detection has to be a little more reliable. You have to be able to do that last minute avoiding of the hazards that are on the surface and finding that right place to set down. So you're also level or within a tolerance that you can be for level on the surface.
We've talked a little bit about how this is a different model for us. So how does NASA help ensure success while we also allow these companies to figure out their solutions?
We're able to offer our technical expertise. So companies can ask for technical experts from NASA that might be an expert on lunar surface conditions or orbits around the moon, or even just in assembly of the spacecraft, the vehicles. But they can also ask for help during the mission. We provide help through our deep space network to get the communications, to bring the data back to the control center here, to help them maybe understand their orbit better or get more communication with the spacecraft as well. So both in advance of the mission and during the mission also.
And CLIPS is just one way that NASA is using, we're working to strengthen the American space economy. So what are some other ways, and why is NASA pursuing this commercial route for complicated space missions?
So we started back in space station, where we started with the commercial cargo, where we spurred on investment in commercial delivery of cargo to space station. That's ported over into our crews flying commercially. We're doing that on the Artemis program, buying things by service so that we can spur on other investment that allows us to get our resources and use them elsewhere to do other parts of our mission, exploring the moon or beyond.
You talked a little bit about Artemis for a second. So how does CLIPS fold into NASA's plans with Artemis and with this Moon to Mars architecture?
I think I could talk about Artemis for hours, but CLIPS is absolutely essential for Artemis. It's our first steps of understanding the lunar environment. So the Intuitive Machines lander is going to help us understand how the lunar dust moves as the rocket plume, the exhaust of the rocket hits that dust. We need to understand that because we're going to land even bigger landers with our humans in the future, and we want to land it close to our other elements so we're not blowing that dust everywhere. How does it behave? So that's just one part of it, but it is our first step of understanding that environment that we're going to put our astronauts on the surface.
And of course, we're really, really looking forward to that mission. But for now, thank you so much for joining us here today. We are going to go back to Gary and Josh to highlight some more payloads ahead of the powered descent initiation.
Hey, thanks, Leah. A report at 4:54 p.m. Central Time from the flight control teams shared that Nova C is less than 30 kilometers above the lunar surface and is in the lunar southern hemisphere. We're still on track for PDI at 5:11 p.m. Central Time. Nova C will perform this maneuver to slow the vehicle's descent, then pitch over and scan the landing site for hazards, making any necessary corrections in the final burns to ensure a safe landing. We've highlighted 5 of the 6 NASA payloads so far throughout our broadcast today. Let's talk about the final NASA payload, LN-1. Lunar Node 1, or LN-1, is a small CubeSat-sized flight hardware experiment that integrates navigation and communication functionality for autonomous navigation to support future lunar surface and orbital operations.
Lunar Node 1 is meant to be a demonstration of how we can use various navigation technologies to figure out where you are in and around the moon. I'm holding in my hands the Lunar Node 1 mass simulator. We use this build to test out our vibrational modes, put on a shake table, and also do fit checks with the lander itself. Inside of our payload, we have multiple electronics boards that fit within this chassis that is a little bit about a half U in size. You can see our external connectors here where we have our data and power to the lander itself. And within here, we have multiple boards that do the power regulation, our data control, our FPGAs, all those kind of electronics pieces are in here, as well as a small S-band radio that attaches up underneath this top radiator in order to distribute this heat, and then to talk to the antenna, which mounts here. This is the same size and build as the flight payload. It's just not covered in MLI or some of the other materials that you'll see on the flight build itself.
LN-1 will test a lunar navigation concept of operations with the implementation of MAPS, or the Multi-Spacecraft Autonomous Positioning System. Ideally, this kind of technology can support a network of communication and navigation amongst local surface and orbital operations. LN-1 will test multiple navigation links from the surface of the moon back to Earth to characterize both MAPS transfers as well as GPS-like signals that could support a future lunar communication and navigation network.
Gary, one of the best things about communication and data is getting imagery back. And Intuitive Machines has several camera systems on board, including Eagle Cam. It started as a challenge from our CEO, Steve Altimus, to his alma mater, Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Students and faculty created Eagle Cam to take an out-of-this-world selfie of Odysseus landing on the moon. The camera system could capture the world's first ever third-person picture of a spacecraft spacecraft making an extraterrestrial landing. The camera system is designed to deploy off of Nova C approximately 30 meters above the lunar surface and take images of Odysseus during landing. Additionally, the device will test a dust removal system, which could lead to the future advances in spacesuit technology. As part of this project for EagleCam, Embry-Riddle teamed up with NASA's Kennedy Space Center to demonstrate the NASA-developed electrodynamic dust shield, or EDS. EDS uses an electric field to remove dust. The technology was tested aboard the International Space Station and will be the first ever demonstration of EDS technology on the lunar surface after landing. Intuitive Machines also had several cameras on the lander, including wide and narrow field of view cameras. They started the mission with incredible imagery as the SpaceX second stage deployed our Nova C lunar lander, capturing iconic images of the Earth after separation. It requires a lot of planning, work, and just a hint of luck. Payload integration managers programmed the lander's wide and narrow field view cameras to take 5 quick images every 5 minutes for 2 hours, starting 100 seconds after separating from SpaceX's second stage. Out of all of those images that were taken, we ended up with just 4 inspiring ones to show humanity's place in the universe. And right now, we're a little more than 10 minutes from powered descent initiation. Let's go to Leah Cheshire one last time for the final interview ahead of this critical maneuver. Leah.
Thanks, Josh. I'm here now with Nikki Fox, NASA's Associate Administrator for the Science Mission Directorate. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's a great day.
It is a great day, and you're watching this with leaders from NASA and Intuitive Machines, just very close to hear what's happening in the room right now just before these final descent maneuvers.
Oh, there's just excitement, anticipation. Everybody knows landing on the moon, going to the moon is hard. And we're already celebrating because this mission is already a success. We've launched, we had a beautiful launch. We've taken great science data all the way, every single challenge. The team has really risen up and solved it. And now we're in lunar orbit, minutes away from starting our descent down to the lunar surface. So for me, so many successes with this mission already. So just a lot of excitement.
I'm loving that. So we are working with these American companies in a very unique way. These are challenging goals, and some people would probably consider this a bold endeavor. But what does it mean to you when you look at pursuing challenges in a bold new way?
I mean, you're right. It is bold. It is a new way of doing science. It is a partnership with totally new companies who haven't done these things before. And we are partnering with them, and they are taking our science. It's a way for us to get more science and more technology to the moon quickly. So it's faster, it's very cost effective, it's very efficient. We're on our way. We've got the 6 payloads from NASA, and we're excited to get them down there. With every new thing we do, there's always a challenge, there's always risks. This is a high risk but super high reward, and it'll get tons of science on the surface. And for my NASA science, this is exciting because our Artemis missions and our lunar science touches all 5 of our science divisions in very profound ways. So super excited.
You said high reward. So I want to talk for a minute about the valuable scientific insight that we can get from the moon. What is that? What does it mean for NASA?
I mean, there's so much we can do on the moon, particularly where this one is going down to the South Pole. We think we're going to find great volatiles down there. So as we get prepared to send our astronauts there, then we know that there's water there and we can use that water. Water is very heavy to carry, so it's really great if you can use it on the moon. We can break it up into hydrogen and oxygen, use it for fuel. Really great for our sustainability, but also where they're going is one of the oldest regions of the moon, about 3.85 billion years old. So we can actually learn about what our solar system was like before life started. Life is very noisy. We're very, very noisy here on Earth. The moon is just like pristine. And so we can really do some amazing science.
I look forward to learning more about it. So any final words before we wrap it up?
just thank you. I mean, literally, thank you. This is such an amazing team. Thank you to the people that put the science and the technology experiments on with us, those teams. Thank you to the commercial teams that put their instruments on and are riding with us. Thank you, of course, to Intuitive Machines for this just beautiful, beautiful lander. And thank you to SpaceX for a beautiful ride to space. It's such an incredible effort. All one, I don't know, I'm a big bundle of emotion. Go NASA, go CLIPS, go OD, go Intuitive Machines.
I'm with you all the way. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Now we are following Intuitive Machines flight controllers during Nova-C's final descent. So back to Josh and Gary.
Thanks a lot for that, Leah. During that interview for folks at home, we did hear that there was a maneuver to burn attitude, which means the lander is starting to make the positional requirements needed. And we're going to start listening into the IM1 channel so folks at home can hear. We just heard from flight controller about 5 minutes until TIG.
Altitude of 10 kilometers, downrange 1,100 kilometers.
TIG being time of ignition, so we're inside of 5 minutes.
TIG minus 5 minute dead pins.
TIG minus 5 minutes. We are standing by for powered descent initiation. Gary, this is a critical 11-minute burn to slow the lateral velocity such that Nova-C can pitch over for further operations. And while we were in that interview, we did hear that the main engine gimbal checkout was completed. So now we're focused on the operations with Nova Control. For folks at home, we are listening into the live channel there.
That's right. A lot's happening in Nova Control. We're going to be hearing these status calls periodically as we follow the flight control teams that are monitoring Nova-C's descent towards the lunar surface. A lot's happening, Josh. Of course, we have this 11-minute burn. We're focused on the propulsion elements of this PDI. At the same time, the spacecraft is oriented in such a way that it can use a technology called terrain relative navigation to scan the environment along the way. What's happening there?
Right. So we know that we needed terrain relative navigation then when we were descending and coming down to the lunar surface. Now, this involves two pieces. You have a camera and you also have a laser rangefinder. At the top of the show, we started talking about, hey, the laser rangefinder that Intuitive Machines put on Nova-C, it's not operating. We made the decision for flight controllers to utilize two of the laser beams from NASA's NDL payload, make the software patches required to reassign those lasers into the TRN and HRN cameras in order to give us an opportunity to land on the south pole of the moon today. Gary, is quite the feat and challenge overcome in just about 2 hours because we elected to delay that orbit and go into another orbit. That's why the show was a little bit later. It appears to be paying out. The last call outs that we heard, Gary, we're talking about beginning processing optical images, and that was nominal. The last time we heard that was just about 20 minutes ago.
These status checkouts of these critical systems are essential to understanding the performance. The folks you see now on your view, this is Nova Control. They're monitoring every step and all the data coming from Nova-C ahead of PDI, which is scheduled just a little bit after 5:11 p.m. Central Time. Exactly what are these folks looking at, Josh?
Well, right now, everyone's looking at their assigned screens, and all of them are tailor-made. Generally, there's a few who are looking at the same type of screen, but they're tailor-made for their task. You have Spark looking at electronics, things like how hot are the electronics. Payloads are monitoring different parts and pieces. In
5 degrees of burn attitude.
5 degrees left until burn attitude. The vehicle's still getting ready for this PDI ignition, which we expect here in just about 2 minutes, Gary, two minutes. So everyone's looking at their screens and doing their respective jobs and reporting up into the mission director, while the activity director is keeping in touch with everybody and making sure we're putting this whole thing together.
Press started.
A call for tank press started just a little bit before that, Gary. We did hear that they were working on the cryo fill. So these are all steps that are leading towards PDI, powered descent initiation. We expect that to take about 11 minutes, where we're slowing Nova-C's velocity approximately 1,800 meters per second. And that's required to get this lunar landing opportunity in just a few minutes.
90 seconds to TIG. Propellant tanks at flight pressure.
All right, 90 seconds until we begin that propulsive maneuver. Again, power descent initiation is about a 10 or 11-minute burn that will slow the spacecraft's descent. A lot's going to happen after that 10 minutes, Josh. This is a single continuous burn. After that, we're going to see a lot of events in rapid succession: pitch over, vertical, and terminal descent.
And we just heard another call out from the prop console saying that feed line prep is complete. What that means is Nova-C's propulsion system, that mixture of liquid methane and liquid oxygen, that feed line is prepped, getting ready to go into an injector to blend those two propellants, and the propellant and the oxidizer, and have ignition of PDI. We're tracking that in just under a minute, Gary.
Converging on burn attitude.
Lander is getting into the correct attitude required.
Line prep complete both sides.
Another call for feed line prep complete for liquid methane and liquid oxygen in preparation for this PDI burn.
"15 seconds, exec mode."
15 seconds to exec mode. We're tracking a little less than a minute, though, until the time of ignition for power descent initiation.
Settling. Ignition. Throttling up. Main stage.
There we heard main stage ignition. That's coming from our prop console, Rob
Good
Orville.
control.
GNC call on good control.
Thrust to weight 1.5.
These are great call outs in between our prop console and our flight manager, Scott Tamblin, calling it as the data is feeding into the lander, which means we are continuing to have good communications. The lander is sending that back to flight controllers in Nova Control. Gary, something we prepared for, we planned on, is that loss of communications. And that's why we have this.
I see good thrust control.
It's a good thrust control call from prop, but that's why we have this autonomous lunar lander. You know, we program, we know that, hey, we want to light PDI in this moment. These are the steps you need to get there. But from here in, this is an autonomous lunar lander, and flight controllers are monitoring communications and tracking the progress right along with the public right now with us.
Nova-C has the helm. It is in control and is making the decisions necessary to ensure a soft landing. We heard call outs about thrust, full thrust right now. There is the ability to throttle that thrust, and we'll see that throughout the descent as the fuel tanks continue to unload and we expel that propellant.
And we did have a few questions come in about how much gas are we giving this to slow down the vehicle. We want to remind folks that this PDI burn goes
Commanded thrust 90%.
Goes in just about 90% right on time. So it goes in at 90% in order to, if the lander makes a decision and says, I need to slow down more and make a decision to make a safe landing, it's able to add a little bit more oomph and make that decision a reality rather than just a possibility.
Fido, I'm showing 500 kilometers to target, but my display's a little bit stale.
That's the mission director, Tim Crane, calling about 500 kilometers, but stating that his information might be just a bit stale.
About 1,000 PSI in the helium tank.
It's part of the reason we're showing this animation, Josh. Of course, this is not telemetry driven. We're just showing you exactly what's happening. As we hear the calls, this information is relayed through the audio loops. Not enough bandwidth to do a live stream of this, so we're relying on the data that's being fed from Nova-C to Nova Control.
Yeah, that data is going into the flight controllers, and what you're seeing on your screen right now is just to give you an idea of the vehicle's attitude. You heard them talking about moving to a burn attitude. This is what we expect Nova-C is doing right now. It is a simulation in the large screen just to give you an idea of what's happening over these critical approximate 10, 11 minutes of PDI, powered descent initiation, trying to slow Nova-C down, bring that acceleration down to about 1,800 meters per second. And there's some follow-on steps after that, Gary. It involves pitching over the lander using that gimbaled engine. We heard the maneuver to burn attitude followed by main engine gimbal checkout. So they'll use that gimbal to pitch the lander over and start a vertical descent. This is where we start getting a little tricky as far as there is a final approach. It may add a few seconds. It may add a little bit of time, but we are intended to land right around 17:24. That's 5:24 p.m. Central Time. But know that there is some give and take. We're also expecting, plan for, and train for a little bit of loss of communication during this process.
That's right. And that communication is absolutely important. And part of the reason, and we've been stressing this, Josh, is the autonomous operations of Nova-C. Part of that is after it performs that pitch over maneuver.
400 seconds to go on braking 1. Good control.
Fido, I see TRN depause processing in flight.
All right, that was the call that we were waiting for. That was our major problem we've been working on in this dynamic situation, is getting those images processed from the HRN camera, TRN camera, which in this case, a dynamic situation, we had to improvise a little bit and reach into those 2 laser beams from NDL, figure out a patch while we were in lunar orbit, just about 2 hours. And it sounds like we are getting good readings from those images. Absolutely remarkable feat. We also happened here, I think it was 400 seconds remaining. That was coming from FIDO and Flight Dynamics. Sean Stewart working the console this evening.
This is excellent calls to hear. Hazard relative navigation is going to be used after the pitch over maneuver. This allows Nova C to make some decisions and scan the landing site underneath it and make decisions in an area that calculates the terrain to make sure that it's landing in a safe landing zone.
Right, so we finish up PDI, pitch over, and we have to use that hazard relative navigation, a critical tool in order to land on the moon, to make those decisions, right? There's no human eyes, human elements deciding, okay, I see the hazard, I need to steer this way, or maybe press the gas, press the brakes. This all happens autonomously, and this is a huge requirement and a great call out to hear about the HRN camera system and processing those images. Right now, I am tracking 5:16 p.m. We expect PDI to go until about 5:21, 5:22.
300 seconds and breaking 1.
Or about 300 seconds to approximate those numbers.
Very precise. Josh, after those final series,
Thrust to weight is 1.7.
Following along, after those critical maneuvers,
Commanded thrust still 90%.
90% thrust. We'll hear those call outs periodically. We started at full thrust, 90%,
Engine
still
performance
throttling,
nominal.
and good performance on that engine.
That's a great call out. 2 things there. Nominal performance on this engine, as well as the helium tank. So what we haven't mentioned so far in the show is that the helium tank pressurizes that liquid methane and liquid oxygen tank. But in addition, it's also used for reaction control system. Those are the small spurts that you see at the top of the lander in the animation that control the vehicle's attitude. So for things like landing on the moon, you really want to land at the right attitude. That way your antennas are facing back, direct line of sight to Earth, and you can get that ultimate confirmation once you do suspect that you have landed on the moon.
The antenna alignment is an important element of landing on the moon, Josh. We're expecting the high gain antennas to be pointed towards Earth to confirm, but there may be a delay.
We are expecting some sort of delay. I had talking to the mission directors about how quickly we could receive a positive confirmation after this landing process is through. And there was some dispute over how long. The earliest was just about 15 seconds after we see timing of when the event is supposed to happen. So right now we're tracking about 5:24 p.m. Central Standard Time. So maybe anywhere from 15 seconds after that, maybe a few minutes, 2 to 3 minutes while we work to acquire that signal, because as you mentioned, the lander is going to a general area.
9 kilometers altitude.
9 kilometers altitude call from Tim Crane. The lander is going into a general area that we say, this is the general area we want you to fly to. It's using that hazard relative navigation to make better decisions about, this is an area with the least amount of slope. This is an area that's free of boulders and other obstacles. So it's making autonomous decisions about where to go.
3 minutes to go, breaking 1.
3 minutes call. Just to wrap that up, when the lander is making those decisions, Gary, it's also very difficult to track. We've been very fortunate thus far tracking communications to this point.
To wrap that up, Josh, 3 minutes, that brings us to just shy of 5:22 p.m. Central Time. We should hear that the power descent and initiation burn is complete, then we'll begin the next series of maneuvers to get us towards vertical and terminal descent. It starts with the pitch over.
And just looking at our notes here, we did go into this burn expecting pitch over at 5:21 and 57 seconds. So good call out on the timing of that maneuver. It's important to remember PDI starts an engine burn that does not stop until landing. So this is a throttleable liquid methane, liquid oxygen engine. We lit the engine at PDI, and while we are changing into a pitch over, vertical descent, and terminal descent and then landing, that is a throttle down to the lunar surface. And when we do get out of PDI, if we hear that call of PDI complete, good burn, everything after that is going to happen in very quick succession, Gary. The time it takes to go from pitch over to landing, or what we estimate landing to be, just looking at maybe 90 seconds is what we expect nominally.
3 minutes to touchdown.
There is some wiggle room. 3 minutes to touchdown call from the mission director.
For an on-time landing, that sets us a little after 5:23 p.m. Central Time.
Right, our notes going into this burn, 5:23 and 25 seconds.
The autonomous operations, Josh, sets this to a clock. This is exactly what we got relayed before the start of our
Still
coverage
processing.
today. We're right on track.
Depause, terrain relative navigation measurements.
Excellent call out. That solution that flight controllers were working so hard on to make sure HRN was working, pulling on extra resources that weren't originally planned for from those 2 laser beams from NDL. It appears and sounds like that solution is working, and the people working to patch that software were certainly under pressure. The clock was ticking as we went into that extra lunar orbit. It wasn't a situation where we could just sit in lunar orbit and try to solve our problems indefinitely, and it's sounding good so far on the call outs.
2 minutes remaining till touchdown.
2 minutes to touchdown. That required a patch to be designed on the ground and uplinked to Nova-C to confirm that those laser sensors on NASA's navigation Doppler lidar could be routed to the terrain relative navigation and hazard relative navigation. That call out is fantastic.
Fido, do you have an altitude reading?
Standing by to see if we can get an altitude reading from Fido here. That's Flight Dynamics Officer Sean Stewart on Blue Team.
Confirm that looked like a pitch over gimbal. Let's do it.
Sounds like we have some data that confirms pitch over. This starts the HDA process. That's hazard detection avoidance. Throughout this show, you've heard Gary and I talking about the problem that was attempted to be solved in lunar orbit, making the decision to not only postpone this show.
NDL indicates altitude of 1,000 meters.
1,000 meters call out from NDL. That is coming from flight management. This is a system right now. NDL was not intended to be the primary landing system on this. Instead, we're using 2 laser beams from NDL and feeding that into that hazard detection and avoidance system that you see on your screen right now, with the lander making autonomous decisions about where it wants to land. That is generally
less than 1 minute remaining to touchdown.
Less than 1 minute remaining for touchdown.
And again, that's the time of touchdown. It may take some time to actually confirm the status of the lander.
And in this process, we do have a deployment of Eagle Cam attempting to take the third-person images of Nova-C going down to the lunar surface. We are inside of 1 minute, Gary.
Yes, we're well into blowdown.
And we're tracking here in the broadcast booth. The clock has reached the expected.
May take a minute for comms to reestablish standby.
There it is, mission director beating us to it. We've reached the expected time of landing, but now is the process of waiting for comms, and we are in standby mode, as you heard it from the mission director, Dr. Tim Crane. And 1 minute has elapsed from the notes that we have, Gary, of that original burn starting at PDI.
And you have carrier lock.
That's MD asking if we are getting the ground stations locked on to Nova C. That carrier lock call, Gary, we expect that to come from GroundNet or COM, that conversation possibly not happening on our public channel that we have access to. We're just standing by to hear that come through the channels as we approach almost 2 minutes since we estimated the landing time. We did get a few call outs on the side, folks coming into the room saying there was about a 2-minute forgiveness in our timetables.
We are checking our antenna reception.
Checking antenna reception. And we're standing by, Gary. We're standing by just as we approach 5:26 p.m. Central Standard Time. Given those mission directors' notes of the flexibility between what we were tracking, what we were given was just about 5:24.
All stations, this is MD. Please look back through your logs and confirm the last information you had, and we'll determine this is a comm outage.
And that's the mission director, Gary. These are our notes here of what we believed. We talked about the comm outages with the lander making autonomous decisions. This is the process of going through the last bit of data that came into Nova Control and working to verify, okay, this is the last bit of data. Where was the lander possibly going? How do we look for it and establish those communications? Nova C uses 4 antennas placed at the top of the lander that are designed to capture these communications. But we did expect this. We talked about it, that this is a communications challenge in it of itself. And right now we're standing by to hear that communications call out.
We're just a little more than 3 minutes from the time of when the clock reads 0 for Nova C landing on the moon.
And we just checked with our team here in the broadcast booth, decided to let's stay on this. All the chatter we are not hearing on this public channel, Gary, all things indicate that we are working to solve a possible communications challenge in this moment. So we're going to continue to stand by.
For those following along.
MD Prime on IM1. Go for Prime.
Yeah, I guess you polled the room looking for states, and we're going to go ahead and cycle the ground transmitter on Goonhilly and do some RF sweeps. Is that your plan?
That's correct.
Roger, copy.
And that's just what we had in mind in our notes, Gary, is that if we encounter a communications challenge, we mentioned how difficult it is to land on the moon and continually have those communications. What you just heard there is folks talking about using the Goonhilly Earth Station Limited dish in the U to do a sweep looking for that signal. We mentioned that autonomous process of the lander reassigning itself somewhere that it believes is safe. Going into it, we heard that the HRN camera was functioning and able to make those decisions after what was a 2-hour orbit of problem solving with Intuitive Machines' TRN and HRN cameras, the laser rangefinders assigned to those are the ones that Intuitive Machines installed inside the navigation pods. The laser rangefinders were not activated. We went to NASA and asked to use 2 of the laser beams on the navigation Doppler LiDAR.
That's right.
And spent 2 hours in orbit.
Team, we're going to confirm our pointing vector with our antenna for post-landing.
Yep. We spent about 2 hours in orbit to solve that problem. We got good readings on the way down. And right now, we are working to confirm communications on the surface of the moon, roughly around the Malapert A region. That is the South Pole region of the moon.
That's right. What we do know is the powered descent initiation. We were following along in the status calls. We executed a pitch-over maneuver, and we're counting down the clock to a landing time of 5:23 p.m. Central Time. Well, Josh described those processes of working on the communications component to confirm data from the lander, pulsing the teams surrounding him to check the status of Nova C and the data that they were receiving here in Nova Control to confirm landing. And part of that, Josh, as you described, is communications. We're standing by.
Fido MD on IM1.
QMD.
I'm looking at our phase plane there for the last part of the flight. Looks like we had excellent pitch and yaw control throughout, but I did see a little bit of a roll excursion. Could it be that we landed off angle and roll in the final phase?
So I do see we had up to an 8-degree excursion. We're about to begin the roll maneuver, which is about
terminal phase.
The terminal phase, which is a large roll maneuver to get to landing attitude. That's the last data point I have. But up until that point, we were really solid.
Right. So terminal phase begins at 30 meters. Or post HDA.
Post HDA.
Post HDA.
400 meters.
Very good.
And that's a great conversation confirming.
That's good ground network. Good for box scan. Make that go.
Yeah, that was good confirmation of the process that we were very familiar with, talking about the attitude of the lander, making sure that those antennas are within direct line of sight with Earth stations, ground stations on Earth, excuse me.
Mission director at all stations are also updating our pointing vector with our dishes to make sure that they're tuned in on our final landing site.
There's a call. We're searching for that communications back to the ground station. This one particularly is in the UK that's tracking us. And it's important to note, Gary, that we have an entire network dedicated to working these communications problems. It's been active this entire mission. And the largest, most powerful dish out of all of them is about a 64-meter dish in Australia. That time to search with that opportunity with the largest, most powerful dish, we're looking at about 12 to 13 hours after our estimated touchdown. So this is a process that we could be looking and searching for the lander's signal for confirmation for quite some time, but we're going to continue to listen in and stand by as our flight controllers are working with the ground station in the United Kingdom to work this issue, work this problem. It's another challenge, very similarly to the challenge solved just to make it this far.
Signs of life. We have a return signal we're tracking. We have an onboard fault detection system for our communications that after 15 minutes with lack of communication will power cycle the radios. And then after that, for another 15 minutes, it will then switch antenna pairs. So we have some time here to evaluate. We do have signal that we're tracking, so we'll see what happens.
There's a great call out about the autonomous systems installed on our Nova C-class lunar lander named Odysseus. The process he's mentioning, Gary, is very similar to the one that we were preparing ourselves for at AOS, to where the lander has systems in place to recycle its antennas, to switch antenna pairs. And that was very similar to what we thought we were going to need to do after acquisition of signal. When we separated from the second stage of the launch vehicle, if we made it to a certain point, the lander was autonomously programmed to start taking matters into its own hands, and that was the information that our mission director, Dr.
We're not dead yet.
We're also not dead yet.
And the key here, Josh, is patience. It's 5:34 p.m. Mission Director Tim Crane confirming that it could take 2 phases of 15-minute increments to confirm the status of the landing. So we could be here, and we'll stand by and monitor as Nova Controls continues to work this issue.
Yeah, tense moments inside of mission control with the most qualified folks.
We're picking up a signal from our high gain antenna and transmitter. It's faint, but it's there. So stand by, folks. We'll see what's happening here.
All right, we're going to continue to stand by. Let's keep this camera on inside of Nova Control. It sounds like we are getting some kind of faint signal.
I want to send a series of commands to reactivate, make sure we're transmitting to keep the Quasonics active.
We're still standing by. The last call from Mission Director Dr. Tim Crane was that we were getting a faint signal from Odysseus's high gain antenna.
All stations, this is Mission Director on IM1. We're evaluating how we can refine that signal and dial in the pointing for our dishes. What we can confirm, without a doubt, is our equipment is on the surface of the moon, and we are transmitting. So, congratulations, IM team. We'll see how much more we can get from that.
An excellent call from our Mission Director, Dr. Tim Crane. And over to our CEO, Steve Altemus.
Yeah, if I could just pass on a few words to the entire team in Intuitive Machines and SuperBab and here in the Mission Control. What an outstanding effort. I know this was a nail biter, but we are on the surface and we are transmitting. And welcome to the moon.
Houston, Odysseus has found his new home.
An excellent call, and this is our team of Intuitive Machines mechanics and their families, their friends, everyone who has sacrificed so much to make it this far.
Stations.
How about that call, Gary? That was something else, a faint signal. Now it's time to work on refining that signal. But Dr. Tim Crane, our mission director today, making the call. Odysseus has a new home.
It shows the disciplines of the flight controllers in Nova Control. They waited until there was absolute confirmation that there was a signal, and then that was when they took the moment to celebrate. We saw that it wasn't just the individuals in Nova Control that contributed to the mission. The contributions to enable the success of Nova C's landing on the moon stretches far and wide. We showed, of course, some of the folks watching there, but really it extends even farther than this. A wonderful and truly amazing moment to celebrate. The U.S. has landed on the moon once again.
And to everyone, you mentioned it goes beyond just the folks that we saw on camera waiting and working through those tense moments, but their friends, their families, and everything it took to get to this point. We're still expecting an image. We expect that to come down sometime in the future, especially as we look towards some high resolution images. Let's go ahead and It sounds like we do have a message we'd like to cut to. Can we have that message special for our folks, our employees, and folks watching at home?
Hey, that's right. With Nova C landing at Malapert A, congratulations, like you said, Josh, are flooding into the teams that made this happen. Really sets a tone for the American leadership and the future of a strong lunar economy. So here's NASA Administrator Bill Nelson.
On the 8th day of a 250,000-mile voyage, a voyage along the Great Cosmic Bridge from the launch pad at the Kennedy Space Center to the target of the south pole of the moon, a commercial lander named Odysseus, powered by a company called Intuitive Machines, launched upon a SpaceX rocket carrying a bounty of NASA scientists